My friends went inside, but they're not back yet. I told them not to go.
I'll take care of this one myself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in with us for another episode of the Retro Achievements Podcast, where we cover a variety of genres, topics, and discuss the bits and bytes of yesteryear. With our video game website hitting new record-breaking active users regularly, and having talked on episodes prior about where we started, I couldn't help but ask myself, as I'm sure others do as well, where are we going and what does that look like? What started as a small but concentrated effort by a group of friends has now morphed into a zeitgeist of entertainment that evolves by the month. Ultimately, while the end goal for all of us would appear to be have a good time, what is considered an achievement can be quite subjective. With so many moving pieces on the board, some guidance and perspective from those who are putting the figurative pen to paper could be valuable. For exactly that reason, I have my guest here today, Wes Copeland, recent admin, official Guinness record holder, and web developer for RetroAchievements. With rich history and catalog of experience built up through tech and real-world application, this is sure to be a fantastic discussion. Wes, welcome aboard. How you doing tonight?
Hey man, I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I wanted to have in the works for a while now, more than a common name in the community at this point. We've seen a lot of changes come down the pipeline from your end. We've seen improvements on the web-based front. We've seen improvements on how speedy things moved. UI, visualization. It's thrilling to have you here. Couldn't be happy to have you, more part of the community. Frankly, more questions than I have time to ask. But just let's start broad, man. How have you been? What brought you here? What are you doing? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell the listeners.
Well, yeah. So like I said again, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Just briefly about me. Before sort of this stint that I've been doing at Retro Achievements, I'm mostly known in the wider gaming community for my competitive history with Donkey Kong and a few other titles. Broke the world record for the original arcade game several times in 2015 and 2016. Landed some publicity on, Ars Technica, Polygon, a few other press outlets. Since February of this year, around that time, I've been wearing multiple hats, sort of as a web developer and contributor to Retro Achievements. Doing whatever I can to help enhance and nurture the platform just as best as I can with whatever skill set I have that I can provide. Gaming's always been more than just a hobby for me. It's a great way to connect with a community that shares a love for the nostalgia challenge and discipline required to master these old titles. So I'm really eager to dive into these topics and more.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to ask you right off the bat was kind of, how did you hear about the website first and foremost? I only kind of came onto the scene in January of 2022. I haven't been around for a while. It started off in the teens. What made you notice this place?
So it's kind of funny you ask. I actually I have an old account lurking around from 2014. I don't even remember how I found the site in 2014. I remember it looked a little different than it does today.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I went to that profile because I stumbled upon it again. I was looking for if I had any alt accounts, and I found that account from 2014 I forgot about. And so I opened the user profile, and of course it just fired up Donkey Kong on the NES, unlocked, 6 achievements, and then pieced out for like 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Really, I started getting more heavily involved whenever the pandemic started.
Sure.
March, April 2020, around that time, I was, bored at home. The lockdown was going on, and it was really hardcore, sort of where I lived. So I really didn't have a lot going on. I was working from home. I remembered that I stumbled upon this website years and years ago, and I opened it, and it looked a little different from the last time that I saw it, to put it kindly. So I started playing some of these games again, and it was really cool. Like I remember thinking, I was just amazed by like how much content that there was, and it was good content, like really good stuff. Just the amount of thought and discipline that must have gone into building some of these achievement sets. I just sort of immersed myself and started mastering some of these games that I was finding. It was just awesome. That's sort of how I got re-involved, per se.
Sure.
From the web development side of things, there were these nagging itches on the site that I just kept thinking to myself, man, this is really great, but I'd really like to change this. Or,
fine, I'll do it myself.
yeah. Yeah, wow, man, this is really cool, but man, it'd be way cooler if it did this, And
Right.
I kept having those things, and it kept bugging me and eating away at me, and finally I just threw my hands up and I said, man, I got to do something about this. And that's sort of where it all started. That's my brief history with getting involved with the site.
I mean, it's definitely something that's, if nothing else, funnily respectable. I kind of said it jokingly, but it is that fine, I will do it myself then. You found something that was a little bit aggravating, a little bit, maybe not aggravating, that's a little heavy of a word, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you said, this could be improved. Let me figure out the tools. Let me learn from it. I'll implement it. I'll make it better for everybody. I'm sure I'm not the only one to know it.
Right.
That being said, it's very interesting that you came in so early. I believe you said about 2014. I can't place an actual dart on the calendar here, but I can say that if Discord was around, it definitely wasn't as active and as far spread and wide-reaching as is today. I imagine having the back-and-forth nature, the readily approachable communication of an instant chat type thing rather than ye old BBS is a little bit more accessible.
I would agree with that. I don't think that Discord was really a thing at that point in time. If
Right.
it was, it certainly was, just a very tiny startup that was, just getting off the ground.
Very small.
I don't remember exactly what the site looked like at that point in time. I remember it was very different than obviously what's there right now.
Sure.
There's still some of that legacy code in the code base from features that existed at that point in time, and so I can only imagine what it was like. But the quality of sets was very different at that point in time, not for better or for worse, just different. There wasn't a vast pool of developers to learn best practices from, and the toolkit wasn't nearly as mature as it is today.
Sure.
So it was just a very, very different atmosphere back then. I only remember bits and pieces of it, so it's sort of hard to imagine, but it is kind of crazy, really, if you think about it. The whole site is just, some person's hobby project that just grew astronomically. It's really cool in that way.
I couldn't agree more, and there's something I can't, I swear I'm not saying purposefully, but ever since one watcher or listener ended up calling out that I say it often, it comes up and I can't help but address it every time now. But it does seem like with this website and with this format, there's a lot more meat on the bone. We haven't even come close to reaching the end potential of what could be seen or realized with Retro Achievements. There's a lot of people out there that compare it to the backlog website or compare it to, other tracking devices. But the difference between them and this is you have participants in the community building pieces of it. Sure, it can look a little bit similar, but that one key factor is what differentiates it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I still think that, how do I say this? Whenever I started getting involved in fixing that one little thing that bugged me, that was like pulling back the curtains and seeing a whole world that I didn't really know existed. And I saw, after I fixed that one thing that was nagging at me, man, all of a sudden there's 10 more things that I need to fix these things now too. And each of those things spawned even more things. Oh man, well now I gotta fix them.
You're fighting a Hydra.
I quickly became convinced that there's literally an infinite number of tasks that need to be done. It's very interesting to think where a lot of that will eventually take the platform in the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of limitless scope out here. I do definitely hope we find a way to defeat the Hydra that you've definitely described. One thing I would say is, like I talked about with previous guests on this website who have been around for a long time and have had previous nature, even Scott, who's been on, the toolkit now, just like you said, isn't even close to what the toolkit was then. And now you're almost, it isn't a complete one-to-one, but in a figurative sense, you're bringing the web dev stuff up to a more advanced toolkit. You're making a foundation. You're building the scaffolding of which to pivot off from. Sure, the tools that are going out right now might not be the flashiest. We do every now and then get a good cosmetic update that looks pretty good. But the fact that just maybe a month ago we got one hell of a speed increase, that's a night and day difference. So it's almost, hey, we upgraded the dev toolkit. Let's see what we can do to upgrade the web toolkit.
And I should say that like a lot of the performance optimizations that are happening on the site is not my doing.
Oh, really?
I certainly don't want to take credit for work that I'm not doing.
No, please, shout them out. Shout them out.
Yeah. So you have guys like Lukeos who have been, planning a lot of those database infrastructure upgrades for years.
Absolutely, and it's noticed.
Yeah, I really should say, in terms of my day job and whatnot, I'm mostly on UI and user experience. That's really what I own where I work. So I've definitely been learning a lot on this as well. In terms of the site infrastructure and whatnot, I help where it's needed, but I'm definitely not the master of a lot of the performance optimization that's been happening.
Well, to everybody out there who has been contributing to making the website run faster, look better, and be an all-around better experience for the players, devs, and frankly, yourselves, hats off, a glass raised to you, and we're thrilled to see it. That being said, guys, we have a lot more to come, a lot of questions in store for Wes, hope to glean a lot more information about where RA is going, but that will all be when we come back.
I'm gonna rip your heart out.
Flawless victory.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Retro Achievements podcast. As we covered on the intro, we were getting to sit down with Wes, getting to see, how we got more familiar with the site, getting to see how we got reintroduced to things. But I wanted to take it back a step. I wanted to look at a little bit of a bigger picture, a broad perspective here. Wanted to see a little bit more about where you came from, Wes. If it's all right, don't touch on things that you don't feel like digging into, but I want to get in at your early childhood memories, man. I want to know what it was like being a kid. I'm sure you came onto the scene. Games were probably introduced fairly early on, technology probably even earlier, but it's one of those things where I find that what a child participates in with their early memories follow through with what they do in their adult life. Is that assumption true with you as well?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. Yeah, some of my earliest memories, whenever I was really young, in terms of gaming specifically, I must have been, 2.5.
Oh, wow.
We went to this secondhand gaming store somewhere downtown in the city where I lived. And I didn't have any gaming consoles or anything like that at home at that point. And so my dad took me and we were gonna get an NES.
Sure.
So we walk in the store, and I remember, he didn't want to buy me games all the time, understandably so. So we got the hardest stuff that was there. That's what he asked for. So I went
longevity.
Yeah, I went home with Contra, with Ninja Gaiden, stuff that I didn't have a chance of beating as a 2-year-old.
Hell yeah. Let's go, Dad.
Yeah, and I still haven't beaten Ninja Gaiden to this day. Maybe one day.
Daddy Copeland knew what was up.
Yeah, but so that was one of my earliest exposures. But really, I think where everything started for me was, so my dad, he spent a lot of time in the arcades, in the 80s.
Sure.
And his favorite game was Defender.
Yes.
Yeah, if you've played Defender, then it's...
Small, I'm cutting you off. I am sorry. Small World, that is my dad's favorite arcade game and how he introduced me to video games. That is fucking crazy.
Great.
I am sorry.
No, that's great, man. Okay, if I continue?
Absolutely. My mind is just a little fried. Go on, please.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so my dad's favorite game was Defender, and... man, very, very difficult game, but very rewarding if you get really good at it. After he would come home from work, basically he wanted to be able to play Defender at home, so he found a local dentist who for some reason had a Defender game in their practice. Of course, nobody wanted to play it. Man, the game's too hard.
An actual cabinet.
Yeah, an actual cabinet.
Ooh.
And so he bought it from the dentist and brought it home.
Absolutely. Oh, Dad's a winner.
Yeah, we always had the Defender game in the living room. And, man, I don't know. I didn't have many games growing up, but there was always the Defender. So I just, I played the Defender all the time. And, man, I was banging out 100,000, 200,000 point games. And I didn't really think anything of it, but it turned out that was actually really good.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know, like whenever I was 11 or 12 years old, I could already get up to $250,000 on Defender.
Whoa.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was actually a really, really high score.
Yeah, over here I'm like, woo, I beat stage 3. I'm doing good this game.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the average score on Defender, well, for somebody who's new, the average credit in that game lasts about 12 seconds.
Yeah, it's absolutely brutal.
Yeah, a good game is really 40,000, 50,000 points. I didn't know that at the time, though. It was all that I'd been around.
I was going to say, it's funny about the lack of limitation that a childhood's ignorance, and I don't say it with a negative connotation. A child's ignorance is one of those kind of almost beautiful things. The lack of limit that allows you to just be like, yeah, I'm doing this casually, whatever, whooping Defender's ass. Yeah. And you don't even know it's a big deal. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah. No, I remember right after I graduated college, my city, I lived in Little Rock at the time, Little Rock, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. We had just opened a local arcade. I would go to that local arcade 2-3 times. It's called the Vortex Arcade. It's still there.
Awesome.
If you're in the area, if any listeners are in the area, it's a great place to hang out.
Check it out.
Very supportive group of people. They're great people. They had a Defender game. It's hard to find a Defender game. They had one. It was in great shape. And so after work, I would go there and I would play just to blow off some steam. And man, I remember I would be in there, and the first time they saw me play, it blew their minds.
I bet, man.
Yeah, it was awesome because I could just sit there, start a game, and I could just play as long as I wanted to on that one game.
You get into a flow state.
You get into a flow state, and it's very few games I can do that with, so I always cherish that I was able to do that with Defender. But, while I was at that arcade, the owner there was really big on Donkey Kong. I didn't know anything about Donkey Kong, but they had various tournaments and whatnot. They had an event called the Kong Clash.
So hold on. Before you even get started on this, am I to understand that you had not touched Donkey Kong until you were in college?
Shortly after college, yeah.
Jesus Christ! And you were a world record holder?
Shortly after college was the first time I played. Yeah, so like... yeah.
All right, go on.
Yeah, the way it went down was, this arcade, they had this event called the Kong Clash, and they had already done it for 2 or 3 years. It wasn't formally at the arcade because the arcade had just opened, but they had it at their warehouse while they were planning to open the arcade. The arcade had been in the works for several years up until that point. They were already hosting this tournament.
All right.
So this was the first one they were going to have in the arcade after it opened, and, the owner and I, we had developed a little bit of a rapport. And he said, man, you're a great gamer. Why don't you try to participate in this Donkey Kong event? And I flat out told him, man, I've got no business playing in your Donkey Kong tournament. And he said,
I only know one game and it's Defender.
Yeah, he said, no, man, like we've got these different divisions. You can play in the beginner division and it's a little bit more fair, which, that makes sense because there's a wide range of skill whenever it comes to playing Donkey Kong.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, all right, well,
easy to learn, hard to master.
Yeah, I'll play in the beginner division. And so I played and I came in last.
Ooh.
Yeah, my score was something like 19,000 points. It was not good.
That's a Time Crush score. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like making it past the first screen.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's Time Crush score. I'm proud of that one.
Yeah, I was happy I did that good. He said to me, look, I bet whenever we have this event next year, you can do a lot better if you practice. And I said, all right, well, I'll commit to practicing and getting, better at the event next year.
It lit a little fire in you.
And so what I did was every single day after work, I grinded that game.
It didn't light a little fire, it lit a fucking bonfire. Oh my God.
Yeah, so within
day.
Within 2 months, I was already at 850,000. And
whoa.
Yeah, I was already at 850,000 and I had already gotten my first kill screen.
Yep.
And so I set the notch a little higher. The arcade high score was 903,000. And I was like, man.
So hold on, if I could interject, how do you?
Yeah.
I'm not exactly super intimate with the familiarities of the Donkey Kong kill screen. I know it's basically where you hit a RAM integer value that it can't handle. Mm-hmm. But like, how do you avoid that and keep progressing in your score?
Yeah, so essentially, The easy way to think of it is Donkey Kong, it has a bunch of levels. You can always see what level you're on if you look at the top right of the screen. And the game gets harder and harder until you hit level 5. And once you hit level 5, the difficulty plateaus. Mm-hmm. And so basically, if you can play through level 5 and not die, you can make it.
You can play Donkey Kong.
You can play Donkey Kong. But there's a timer as well. You can't just camp on one screen forever. You need to keep having some forward momentum. You need to keep moving through the game. You can't just sit on one ladder and, sort of bide your time, go get a drink.
You gotta haul a little bit of ass.
Just a little bit. And, if that timer hits 0, you'll die. Well, what happens is whenever you hit the very first stage, a barrel board of level 22, which is roughly 126, 127 screens into the game, the timer, it should start on about 8,000. Well, it starts on about 400. And so you have just enough time to grab a hammer, maybe smash a barrel or two, and then the timer will hit 0 and you will instantly die.
So it's literally an impossibility to complete that level.
You cannot progress past that screen.
Kill screen.
Yeah, so if you're playing extremely safely, like what they did in the 80s, you can get to that screen, 850,000, 900,000 points. Wow, that's a really great score in the 80s because it was just a matter of survival. They really didn't know all the things we know about the game now. So, wow, you made it to the end. Wow, that's really incredible, man. Wow, that's really something. More modern thinking is, all right, we have a finite number.
You're playing it off as nothing. Meanwhile, I would take a picture of myself at that screen and frame it on my wall for the rest of my life.
And that's perfectly fine. 850,000 is a really great score. More modern thinking is, all right, well, we have a finite number of screens in the game, and you have a finite amount of time to get points on those screens until the timer runs out.
How do we maximize our score?
How can you maximize how many points you get on those screens and then move on? And that sort of thinking, that sort of thing started 20 years after the first person reached a kill screen. They only started thinking about that way later.
So you're doing jumps and barrel breaks and like all these special little tactics.
You're doing all kinds of special little tactics to squeeze out as many points as you possibly can. There's so many things. There's so much nuance to it. There's such a gap between 900,000 and 1 million. All right, well, you've added about 10 more skills to get that. All right, well, now you want to get 1,100,000. Well, that's about 20 more skills that you need. All right, well, now you want 1.2 million. All right, well, that's about 20 more skills that you need.
Oh.
Each of those things, that just means that you're constantly taking more risk. It's really risk on. Like, how much risk are you willing to take? And how much calculation can you do ahead of time to mitigate and weigh all that risk and always do the right thing? It gets absurdly deep and requires great comprehensive thought to be able to play at a really high level. And that really attracted me. I was really fascinated by that. And so I just kept getting more and more immersed in it.
Somebody once described jujitsu, of all things, as advanced real-time calculations of a mathematical problem-solving situation.
Yeah, that resonates.
That's what I'm saying. I can't help but see the parallels between what you just told me there. It's how much do you want to add on? How much can I calculate? How much can I handle? How far can I push my barrier to be able to calculate more in advance? You're playing 5D chess against yourself.
Yeah. And eventually, whenever I was finally at my peak, before I had my final world record game, I had pretty much convinced myself that there was nothing left for me to learn about this game. Take the entire body of knowledge that everyone has ever discovered of this game, and I understood it completely.
I imagine you've seen it in your sleep more than once.
Yeah. With all the barrels and stuff, I had a crazy Tetris effect going on.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that you can control the barrels in the game, and I would just do that constantly in my head. Like, create different patterns and whatnot. Like
layouts and stuff?
Yeah.
It's just your default setting while you're burning time?
Yeah, I would do all that in my head. I would do all the different math and all the different stuff. I would do all that in my head all the time.
Just hanging out, waiting for your oil to be changed,
Yeah.
doing the barrel
Oh,
layout.
I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
I would.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah, and finally what it came down to was I had sort of calculated, all right, this is the amount of risk that I will take. This is the score that I want to get. And I just kept playing and playing and playing. I was playing more than I was working my full-time job. I would play way late into the night, get up, sleep for just a few hours, go through work as soon as I can. Yeah, it was a nonstop, unbelievable grind.
This is your crack cocaine.
Well, what I was looking for was the amount of risk I was willing to take on required a certain amount of luck. So what that means is it's kind of a numbers game. Like I really am going to need the game to give me a little bit back too.
Sure.
But my thinking was if I play perfectly and if I never make any mistakes ever,
eventually you'll get that run.
Eventually the game is going to give me the one that I'm looking for. And finally, one day, it happened. I made it all the way to the kill screen without dying a single time. And it was like everything fell into my lap. I had the greatest randomness in any game I had ever had up until that point. Because I had done all this with all the body of knowledge that was known at the time, I mistakenly convinced myself that, wow, man, this is unbeatable, bro. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I retired at that point, and I didn't play again for a long, long time. And of course, it's been beaten many, many, many times.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's never a wise thing to say to yourself whenever it comes to a record.
It's not the same thing as a high score, but anybody who's watched a Summoning Salt video knows that there's always something that happens 7 years later or something. Oh,
yeah. In this case, that body of knowledge it's so much more now, even than whenever I was playing. And the score is just ballooned so high, so much further than I pushed it. It's kind of wild to see.
The thing is, though, is you got your glory. You put in your time, you didn't shirk on effort, you raised yourself to the standard and overpassed it for what the bar was at your time of entry. You even said to yourself, you went without sleep, you still managed your day job, you weren't probably eating as great as you should have been, but everything else was eat, breathe, sleep, Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And you managed to accomplish it. It's one of those things that I can't help but think that, the habits I had myself in my childhood also develop into my adulthood. So let's try to make an extrapolation or some kind of parallel here from your childhood competitiveness. Not that after college is necessary childhood, but you have definitely progressed since fresh college graduate. Let's look at this competitive, hungry nature, wanting to improve and throwing yourself at everything. Is that not what you're doing here today? Is that not what you're doing with the web dev thing? You've simply found another facet that you're interested in. You see a place that could be done better, and you're trying to do as such.
There is a parallel. I've thought about this a bit, but there is an important difference that really sort of makes the whole picture. What that difference is whenever I was doing Donkey Kong, and the reason I could never do that again is the Donkey Kong thing was a very inward-facing activity.
Yes.
If you really think about it, one could argue that I guess I place activities along a spectrum of consumptive versus productive. And if you really think about it, a lot of the Donkey Kong thing was highly consumptive. I'm sitting here and yeah, sure, I may have invented a few new strategies. I guess that's a form of production, but really this is an inward activity that I'm mostly doing for myself. And, I was streaming. I never looked at my chat. Like this was just me, the game, and there's this thing I have to do. And until I do it, I'm not going to be happy, but it's really all about me.
It's going to consume you.
It's really all about me.
Right.
I wasn't producing anything. So at the end of the day, I guess I just don't place as much value on that as I used to. Whereas with the retro achievements thing, this is a much more productive activity where I can act as sort of a force multiplier that can help other people make others happy. As in, I can enable developers to be more productive and produce higher quality work. I can enable players and users to have a better experience on the site and have more fun. It's much more of an outward-facing activity, and I'm way more fulfilled by that. I guess One way to look at it would be whenever you're in your 20s, early 20s, college graduate per se, you like to go to the theme park and you like to ride the rides. But as you get older and you mature a little bit more, you get a little bit more gray hair, you like to see your kids ride the rides. And I'm kind of in the phase where I like to enable other people to ride the rides, and that really gives me a lot more fulfillment than whenever I'm on them, perhaps, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense, and honestly, I couldn't be more thankful to hear you say something as such. It was the one dichotomy I was worried about between those two departments, because the one thing I was going to say, between the Donkey Kong where you're beating yourself up, there's nobody talking to you, there's nobody there, it's you and the machine. And a very rudimentary one at that, and however much you're willing to beat yourself up. The main reason I was going to draw the difference in a very similar situation, but a very key difference, is you now have a team. You now have a community. You have people who look up to you, and you have people who can help you. It's a place where you will receive feedback, you'll receive criticism, you'll receive praise. But it's a place all the same. The cabinet would never talk to you.
That's true. That's all very true.
This is a completely different environment.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah, that's very true.
But it's definitely something, we still have a lot more to discuss, guys. A lot more meat on the bone. I said it again. But we will be back right after this.
I won! I knew I would!
I've got balls of steel.
All right, everyone. Welcome back. Retro Achievements Podcast. We already got a little bit of an overspective on Wes here, how he got involved in the site. A little bit of the nitty-gritty details on Donkey Kong and how to achieve those high scores, and how, years to come, people will keep finding new ways. But I did want to take a little bit more of a look at yourself, if that's all right. I kind of wanted to dive in on the person. What do you do in your average day-to-day life? What does a job look like for Wes Copeland?
Yeah, so obviously I have a pretty heavy software engineering background. So
I would say.
Yeah, so I've been really involved in like startups and whatnot for, nearly the last 10 years. Originally, I started working as a software engineer in financial, basically fintech, which is just like banking software and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
That was not my thing, to put it kindly. It was a massive company, and I really wanted to work somewhere that was, small, innovative.
Yeah, impactful.
Yeah, impactful. I wanted to be a percent contribution.
Yes.
If you're at a big company, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of benefits to being at a big company. You have this safety net that is not common in small businesses, but you're never going to be a percent contribution.
Right.
Unless you're really, really, really high up the ladder. But at a small company that has maybe, 10 employees, you're a 10% contribution.
Absolutely.
So I really wanted the chance to make a big impact. So I mentioned earlier that I grew up in the Arkansas area. I decided to drop everything and move to Boston, Massachusetts.
Oh.
I really just wanted a change of pace. And so I found a small startup company in a totally different industry, and I worked there for several years. I learned a lot, and that was a really great experience. And since then I've worked with all kinds of different startup companies, including the one I'm currently at. It's been a lot of fun. I've definitely learned a lot. There's definitely been a lot of challenges. I love being able to have that percent impact. Specifically what I do is I'm really heavy on the product side of things. So that usually means like front end user experience, user research, really understanding how people use the product and what makes them happy. And I'm sure that's visible in some of the stuff that I do also on Retro Achievements. I really like to make data-driven decisions, not just stuff that's based on intuition or gut feeling.
Sure.
Because usually my intuition and gut feelings are wrong.
I want pretzels. That's my gut feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, usually those things are wrong. So I like to sort of have a little bit of science to it, But yeah, that's really what I do, is I'm really heavy on making sure that whoever's using the product really has a delightful experience and just isn't ticked off and frustrated the whole time they're using it.
Sure.
So as you can imagine, whenever I became more active on Retro Achievements, there were a lot of things that were ticking me off about the experience of the product. But that's also a great opportunity for change. Making some data-driven decisions around some of those things has also proven to be quite challenging because you have to talk to a lot of people who often have sometimes competing priorities and competing needs. Well, how do you satisfy all of those people? Sometimes that's sort of a fun problem to solve. That's certainly been a recurring theme.
I mean, they say that the mother of innovation is necessity, and I would argue that being constantly frustrated by something and being driven to remove that frustration is a necessity.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's easy to see how you've made that drive forward. One of the things I did kind of want to look at, though, outside of RA, outside of development, outside of these competitive games, outside of those kind of things, how does Wes unwind? What does a day in the life look like where Wes says, I'm done dealing with this technology shit, it can kiss its ass, I'm just trying to be me today? What does it look like?
Oh. All right, so I don't get a lot of those days, but but whenever I do, there's a few different things that I like to do. I have a degree in classical piano performance.
Oh, wow.
Oh, this is all like real nerd stuff, man.
No, that's beautiful. No, fuck that. That's awesome.
No, so sometimes I'll play a bit to unwind. Whenever I was in college, I had to do recitals like all the time. But, it's funny because like most of the students, they were playing like, the usual stuff. Oh, man, like Beethoven or Bach or Mozart. No way, man. I was doing Uematsu. Like some Final Fantasy.
Some esoteric shit.
Yeah. Like really, really. There were some professors at that college who were very unhappy about that, but that's just what I wanted to play. And my instructor, he was cool with it. He was like, as long as, you're growing as a piano player, you can play and perform whatever you want. So like I was really...
Play what drives you.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm really lucky that I had that kind of support system whenever I was in school. He was a really great professor. But, so I still play sometimes to unwind. Obviously, I'll game a little bit. I'm not as hardcore, anywhere near as hardcore as I used to be. I've done some crazy stuff on Retro Achievements, but nothing like the intensity of how things was at one point.
Sure.
Going back to sort of what I said about riding the rides, it's more of just a casual way for me to unwind, not really something I'm looking to compete with. So I've got the music thing, I've got the casual gaming thing. That's really what I like to do. I have hobby projects that I work on that's still coding related. So I'm pretty much coding nearly all the time. But gosh, there's just so much work to do. It's kind of hard to stop.
No, I understand. The list never seems to end, and the older you get, the quicker things get added to the list. I understand your parallel or your phrasing about, the kids riding the rides. The way I've always phrased that, I enjoy playing the RA game more than I enjoy playing games at RA. Mm-hmm. And I just mean that by, I'm part of the news team. I run the podcast here. I just took over the playtest team. It's one of those things where it's like I get more enjoyment out of seeing how I can try to contribute to the community. Yeah. Rather than ratcheting up a never-ending counter. Not to say that that's not something people should be doing. If you're not doing that, there's no reason for me to enjoy what I'm doing.
It resonates, yeah.
Yeah, you get where I'm coming from, and I see that parallel completely.
Yeah.
One of the things I did want to ask, you mentioned in your day job how you help these startups, and I don't want to play your hand, so I'll play mine.
Okay.
I used to work at a place called Liquid Web. It was bought out. It was a web hosting company. We just ran server space and hosted servers, essentially. Linux-based platforms. After it was bought out, there was a period where they brought somebody on for about 6 to 8 months to revamp the team and how it was structured.
Okay.
They had a very fresh energy, very good visionary practice, big picture, with also being able to dial into details. Without trying to reveal too many of your cards, that's kind of what I see that you would be doing at these kind of startups. Is that correct?
That sounds accurate. And, one of the reasons that I get really excited about junior devs coming into RA is there have been, not that this is a bad thing, it's a good thing. There are some people who have been with RA for years and years and years, and they're going to be here for years and years and years more. And that's great. They have a lot of built-up knowledge of how things work and the culture and whatnot, but someone who comes in fresh, the only way I can think of to describe it is they're not poisoned by all that stuff.
Right.
Sometimes they're able to come in with a fresh, totally unique alien perspective,
New eyes.
changes everything. And I think that really makes getting more juniors and getting them promoted really important. I think that having a diversity of fresh perspectives only makes the platform healthier and stronger long term. So yeah, I see that all the time in startups. A lot of times startups, may be in a rut with their processes. Well, we've always done it that way. Well, that doesn't mean that that's always the right way or the best way,
Right.
or perhaps what's right for the moment. That happens, in groups of humans in general. It happens in RA sometimes, but all it takes is somebody coming in with a fresh perspective, able to shake things up. It's usually not someone who's trying to necessarily, drag a group down or anything. It's just sometimes you need a diversity of fresh perspectives.
Absolutely. It couldn't be more valuable. There was actually a psychology experiment, and not to get too in the weeds here. A group of monkeys are placed in a room. There's a ladder, a bunch of bananas at the top of the ladder. If you climb the ladder, somebody comes in and cattle prods you. They slowly cycle out monkeys, cattle prod stops happening as often. Eventually, nobody's getting cattle prodded, but the monkeys who were used to being able to see that behavior would try to pull other monkeys down who never had been cattle prodded because they didn't want their fellow monkey to be hurt. Just because we have always done something doesn't mean we always have to keep doing it. You're not going to get shocked anymore. We have a new way of doing it. It's okay. It's a little bit of a messed up psychology experiment, but it does illustrate how sometimes tradition or our learned behavior can get a little bit warped and prevent us from growth.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that's hard to overcome. But there's a lot of things that can be said of growth.
Well, I should also preface that I'm highly aware that will happen to me too.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. Self-awareness is invaluable.
The person who comes in and shakes things up, eventually it's inevitable that you'll become ingrained in the culture that you have either changed or influenced or created.
Yes.
And sometimes you can benefit just as much from someone else fresh coming in and giving you a new perspective too.
Could not be better said. The recognition to be aware of the fact that you will become, I don't know if complacent is the right word, but maybe comfortable is a more apt word with your surroundings, and how things are done. It is our instinct to resist change. The knee-jerk split-second decision to go, I don't like that. It's in all of us.
Yeah.
And it's just because change is scary, and fear provokes anger. Being cognizant of that fact, that you too are susceptible to it, is an invaluable tool. You, me, otherwise, anybody. It's one of those things that if you are aware of it, you will be better equipped for when it happens, and it will happen.
Yeah.
Still got a few closing thoughts that I want to touch on before we send us off, though. We'll touch in on that, though, right after we get back.
Terminated! Mission completed, sir!
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Retro Achievement Podcast. I just wanted to kind of close in on our final thoughts, a little bit of a wrap-off, a little bit of a send-off. We touched on a lot today. We touched on how Wes got his introduction into RA as a whole. We touched on how he was first introduced in 2014, messed around with Donkey Kong a little bit, then split. How he absolutely dunked on the competition at Defender and made everybody impressed even without realizing that was a big deal at the local arcade, and then from there lost the Donkey Kong arcade tournament, but all the more was encouraged to join, progress, learn, and how to succeed and overcome. If that's not a lesson in and of itself, I don't know what is. That being said, Wes, there's an overarching theme in this thing. What I've seen a lot is, even with the line about wanting to see the kids ride the ride, there's a message of growth here. There's a message of maturing. There's a message of coming to know yourself more, coming to know how you can be more valuable in places rather than, like you said, you're not a percent.
Yeah.
There's just this, like I said, this overarching message of growth. What did you, feel about being on today's episode? What did you feel about the topics? What are you thinking right now?
Yeah, so I'm really, grateful that you had me on. Since I've started, I'm not sure that I have been as good as I should have with like my public-facing communication. I'm often just so buried in my work.
Everybody's got a life. You're good.
I usually just dip in, dip out really quick. But I think it's really awesome how, you bring on so many great names onto your podcast. Like, you have so many great episodes, and gosh, man, I really want to emphasize that I am grateful that you had me on, because it does give me a chance to sort of better connect with the community at large. Because generally, like, I'll dip in and I'll dip out of Discord channels or forum threads really quick, just write a few words to get a point across and then get really back into what it is that I was doing.
Yeah.
But one thing that's really interesting about Retro Achievements is, and I only came to find this after I got really involved, was that this whole thing, this sounds sort of dumb, but obviously it doesn't stand up itself. You have a lot of different people with a lot of great ideas working with different responsibilities, making this sort of well-oiled machine happen. And each one is a cog or a gear in the machine, and each one is very essential. And if you remove one, the whole machine, it either doesn't function as well or it falls apart. And I think one thing I really like about your podcast is you bring on people who are very much part of the machine that keeps this whole thing going. And I am grateful that you put the spotlight on a lot of those people.
I couldn't appreciate the praise more. I'll follow it up by saying there's a reason you're here, man.
Huh?
There's a reason you're here. You're putting a lot of effort forth. You're doing a lot of things for the website. Not everybody's going to agree with them, and that's okay. You're trying to appeal to a massive crowd. You will not please everybody.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, the effort that you're putting forth does get recognized. I can't help but wish the best for you. I can't help but wish the best for the community. But kind of speaking of that, I did want to extrapolate. I want to give you a little bit of a genie's lamp here.
Okay.
Unlimited effort, unlimited time, unlimited resources. You have hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay web developers who know infinitely more than you, and more time. You know what I'm saying? Blank check.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to see RA look like?
Yeah, so I'm going to limit the scope of that a little bit just to 2024.
Okay.
And I'm also going to limit it to, if we really put our heads together, what are some of the problems we can realistically solve in 2024?
You know what? That's a little bit better. That's a little bit better. Let's see what we can do. I don't have a blank check for you. I'm sorry, bud.
Yeah, with what resources we have, what can we get done in 2024? Whenever I really start to think about that, gosh, there's so much that we need to do. There really is an infinite to-do list. So what is it that we might be able to see? Well, I think it would be reasonable to expect continued enhancements to the progression features that were recently rolled out.
Yep.
We're going to make those features more powerful. We're going to make them easier to use, and we're going to make them more fun to use.
Ooh.
And I can't articulate how that's going to happen, but I would say that is almost a guarantee to happen.
Excellent.
Now, if I were to step away or step a little further back and think about, what are some new things that you might expect? I would say that if you find areas of the website that are slow, by this time next year, they're probably not going to be slow anymore.
That's a hell of a bet.
I would say that we're going to definitely have more supported systems around this time next year, though I can't speculate to rumors as to which.
There has been some kind of maritime animal out there in the works.
There has been indeed, and that does seem to be, working through and progressing nicely.
Excellent.
I would speculate, there are some highly requested features that one common request is subset core.
It's actually something I was going to jump in and steal a genie wish off of you of. I was going to ask it if you didn't bring it up. I'm going to be being completely honest. That's the thing I wish for utmost.
To those who are unaware, what that means is if you're playing a set that also has a subset, you don't have to load a hacked version of the game. To play the subset, you can play the core set and the subset, or however many subsets there are, all simultaneously at once. I would say that that's something that is being looked at, and while I can't guarantee it, I can guarantee that we're much closer to it right now than we were just a few months ago.
Ooh.
Or perhaps a lot of people realize, though it's not something we're actively working on right now.
We're not putting an ETA. We're not putting anything.
We do hear that people want to see this feature, and I should say it's not falling on deaf ears. That's obviously a big one. There's other things that people want to see as well. People want to see an improved search system. Man, searching for stuff on the site right now is really hard.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if it wasn't so hard? I think so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that. So there's really a ton of areas that we need to improve. Gosh, wouldn't it be great if events weren't all these manual things that had to be managed in spreadsheets? Wow.
Oh, sweet Jesus, yes.
That'd really be great if that wasn't a thing that had to have happen. Gosh, wouldn't it be great if you had meta badges? So, man, we just added this beaten game system. What if you got a badge for beating every NES Mega Man game?
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah, wow, that would be kind of cool. Or, gee, wouldn't it be, cool if you got a badge for mastering every mainline Final Fantasy game? I mean, these are things that, we're thinking about. And while I can't make any guarantees, we definitely hear that people want this stuff. And it's something that I would anticipate we're going to look at closely next year. So I guess what I'm trying to emphasize, and again, I want to underscore that I'm not making any promises.
No promises, no TAs. This is brain thinking. This is
no
nothing.
promises, no ETAs, but these are things that we hear people want, and it's certainly not falling on deaf ears.
Excellent.
Because at the end of the day, we want them too, and like that was sort of what drove the whole beaten game system.
I mean, even though your kids enjoy the rides, you still do too.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought to myself, wow, I see that developers, they seem to get a lot of hate whenever they do revision. But they got to do revisions, so what is it that causes that, rage? And so I started, just reading through years and years of threads and posts, and really what it came down to was people wanted to use the site like a backlog tracking system. That was really the thing that everybody wanted, but no one was saying. So I was like, well, shoot, if people could track that they had beaten games, that would solve that whole problem.
Right.
So like at the end of the day, that's what people really wanted. And I'm interested to see now if there's a warmer reception to revisions as they happen throughout the year. It's something that I'll be collecting data on and looking at. But I'm sure there's a lot of scenarios like that where there's some problem on the site, but unless you really dig deeper, you only see it like at surface level. You don't actually see what the real underlying culprit is. So that's also something that I'm constantly thinking about. Like, what are the subsurface issues that maybe there's an elegant solution to solve?
No, and it's right. If you're looking at layer 1, you're applying band-aids. It's when you start looking at layer 3 or 4, they can actually apply a fix, where you start addressing the root of the issue, start addressing what's actually the common problem, and trying to find something that is, applicable to damn near everybody. I couldn't be happier to hear where the, future of the site may or may not be going. Nobody is saying anything like that. I'm thrilled to have you on, Wes. It was a fantastic time. If there is anything that you wanted people to take home from today's episode, any closing thoughts or final statements, one or two good nutshelled statements, what would you want here?
All I want to do is make sure that as many people as possible are having as much fun as possible. That's really what I'm interested in doing. And so, feedback is very valuable, especially from a lot of different people. And even if you don't get a response instantly, I promise it doesn't fall on deaf ears. That's really what I'm interested in, is just making sure as many people as possible are having as much fun as possible. And that's really what this is all about at the end of the day.
And I couldn't agree more. Again, thank you for coming on so much.
Wow. All right. Yeah. Thanks again for having me.
It was something that I've been wanting to have in the works for a while. You've been supplying a lot of effort towards this community. A lot of people are as well who listen, and to everybody out there who does so as well, thank you. It's a community effort. It's made for the community, by the community, enjoyed by the community. Wes, thanks for coming on. Other than that, guys, this has been the Retro Achievements Podcast. Thanks for listening. We will see you all next time.